Welcome to another video where I'm going to be looking at something I've wanted to look at for quite a long time and do something on the channel with it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brad St.Croix. I hold a PhD in history from the University of Ottawa, focused on the Battle of Hong Kong. So today, looking at something pretty pertinent to what I've done in my research for that PhD, looking at the episode known as Savage Christmas, part of the Valour and the Horror series. For those of you who know me and my historical work, I'm not a fan of this one at all. I've looked at it for a long time, done lots of research on it on multiple levels as part of my dissertation and an important part of my dissertation, and looking at Hong Kong and the myths about the battle. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. There's just too much. It's too long, and there's so much wrong with this thing. But I'm just going to hit some highlights that I think are worth pointing out because I think they still have resonance today and how the battle is viewed, particularly in Canada. So I'm going to go through that and look at it again. Again, this is different than the normal reaction where I just watch something I've never seen before. I've seen this one many times. I know what I'm looking for. And this one's got lots to it. So we're going to get into it. And there's going to be lots of things. And there's going to be one right off the beginning. I already know I want to go for, but I'll play it. And then we'll just go from there.
This is a true story. In some cases, actors speak the documented words of soldiers and nurses, but there is no fiction.
From the beginning, this is literally a lie. This is not true. None of this is true. None of all of this is a true story. In some cases, yes, there are actors speaking documented words. Yes, that does happen. I'm not denying one famous case in particular. The rest of it is just made up. It's taken out of context. It's literally words that made up by individuals who could in no way have been in those situations, let alone had their words recorded by and seen by the producers. It's just impossible. So there is literally fiction in this episode. They literally started off with a lie that cannot be supported. And it's just something that sets the tone really, really, really poorly, but also shows the striking power of this series and on the understanding of Canada's war, because they make claims like this, which are in no way true. This is just a straight up fabrication that they start with. And the beginning is just kind of an overdrawn pictures of Canada's war. You can hear the music. It's all meant to kind of take on an emotional resonance about all of this. And there's so much here. It's just so hard to dig into, but I just wanted to show the beginning because it really sets the tone. That somber music sets the tone for everything that's coming for the whole series, about the whole little horror of the war that they pretty much focus on for every episode and in every way, shape, and form. There's a lot going on with that, and it's rather unfortunate to me in any way. I'm not a big fan of it, and the McKenna's work, I just say it straight out. They've done all other things, and I don't like it. It's not well. It makes no sense. It's just poorly done. So there you can see the title, Hong Kong, 1941, Savage Christmas. And written by the McKenna brothers. Not a fan of their historical work. So we're going to just let this part go because it's quite important. One of the things I wanted to talk about. Again, the whole British Empire music setting a tone about what's happening. It's interesting to see the footage they got. But it's just misleading in so many ways, shapes, and forms. So they're setting up the context of Hong Kong, talking about what Japan was doing in the war in China beginning, but they don't really cover much detail here. True, all true. Striking footage again, setting the tone about who's the enemy.
The seemingly invincible Japanese troops moved south towards the Chinese border with the British colony of Hong Kong.
Which is true.
In early 1941, Winston Churchill said privately.
So going here, this is going to be talking about why Canadians were sent to Hong Kong in the first place. This is the one I really wanted to focus on and really dig into. It's an important part, so I'm just going to let it go for a little bit, and then I'll jump in. Probably not as much as you think, but then I'll jump in. I can't help myself. This was so much part of my work for so many years. I can't stop myself. So they're going to be talking about Churchill and his role in all of this.
That there was not the slightest chance of holding Hong Kong.
He did say that.
Relieving it if the Japanese attacked.
Correct. He did in early 41.
His military persuaded him that it was worth at least a symbolic attempt to hold Hong Kong. But rather than risk more of their own troops, the British decided to ask Canada to take on the job.
So there's the problem right there. Two things are not talked about at all here, ever. Is they mention Churchill says this in early 41. True, he says it, not the slightest chance it's used in literature. There's a book I have it around here somewhere about this. That's true. He's not convinced in some sort of Machiavellian way later on to reinforce Hong Kong. There's a whole set of changing circumstances that the producers just completely ignore. Right? 1941 is a pretty pivotal year in the First World War. Things change between January and September when this is all being done. This is a huge chunk of time. The United States has become more involved in the war as that year goes on. The Soviet Union is on the Allied side in June of that year, changing everything. Japan is noticing this. Japan is taking different actions. The war in China is still raging. There's all kinds of things going on. And again, there's no evidence to point to the British wanting to slaughter Canadian troops in Hong Kong. They didn't even think that necessarily the colony was going to get attacked. So again, this is the whole tone of all of this. It's just British bad, leaders bad. Everyone wants to kill the poor Canadians. It's this whole poor bloody infantry thing. It's all part and parcel of the same thing, and it just kind of forms the entire this first half of the episode where they're talking about the battle in and of itself, but also why Canadians are there in the first place. Talking about their training here now.
The first Canadian troops designated for the job were these Winnipeg Grenadiers, assigned to garrison duty in another British colony.
It's true. In Jamaica, yes.
Incredibly, Canada answered England's call without making an independent assessment of the peril.
Okay, so two things. And they're not the only ones to do this. They just skip over the training that the Grenadiers actually had in Jamaica. It's one of the few Canadian has training in the mountainous hot warfare or in climates that they would see in Hong Kong. They're one of the few ever in a war to get this kind of training. Other Canadians are sent there later, but if this is one at the time, they're the only one. So it just skips over that part, which is interesting, and hardly anyone other than myself in my dissertation talks about this. One of the things I do agree with the producers here is when they mention the independent intelligence assessment. They don't in any way, shape, or form. And yes, there is a small apparatus within the Canadian government and the Army specifically for intel at this point in 1941 in Canada. But also they're given the British information. The only information they're not given is Ultra. That's it. They have everything else. They're in constant contact with the British embassies. They're talking to each other. Leaders are talking to each other. King, as the defense, right, has access to all of this stuff. I've seen the files. He didn't look at any of it by the looks of it. So that is the only real thing I really agree with the producers on in this, that the Canada didn't do enough to look at it by itself and really should have. And it had the ability to, but just didn't seem to care.
Accepting the mother country's assurance that the men would not be in harm's way.
That's never guaranteed. Harm's way is never guaranteed. This is about the training here. Because there was no grenades. No one had. And that's just not true about the rifles.
They were officially classified by the Canadian Defense Department as unfit for combat.
Okay, that is not what happened. The word combat's never even used in the paperwork. So what happened is a policy was put in place well before any of this, that if a unit, regiment, battalion had gone overseas, they had to automatically come back and get refresher training in Canada before being sent out again. The Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles didn't have that. That it doesn't happen. Not that they're not trained. That's nonsense. They are trained. They're trained in better than some other units. Like I just said, in mountainous warfare, they train for that as best they can with the circumstances. No other battalion in the Canadian Army was better suited for this. They all would have had the same results. So that's just not true. And the word combat is never used in any of the reporting at all. Like, it's shocking that they make these assumptions and assertions.
In Canada, the Grenadiers were joined by another unit with the same classification, the Royal Rifles of Canada.
They were in Newfoundland. Same thing.
For security reasons, the 2,000 soldiers had no idea where they were being shipped.
That's true.
What threat they would face.
Well, about the threat, nobody knew, or nobody wanted to know. Again, all this is in my dissertation. You can check that out easily online.
Was 21-year-old John Payne, an artist and musician.
He comes up later again.
To be a soldier. His father was
and we'll come back to that in a second. So I'm just going fast forward through some of this. So this part is very interesting. It's from one of the nursing sisters that went along with Seaforce, as it's known, the Canadian reinforcement. Completely out of context. They did speak with Kay Christie, who was alive at the time of the production, and met with her personally. But they took everything completely out of context, and I'll explain it real quick after this little vignette.
Kay Christie was one of 3 Canadian nursing sisters with the expedition.
It's only 2.
Outside our cabin, they are giving them lectures, telling them what this end of the rifle is called, where to put the bullet in. Honestly, it's just appalling.
So Christie said those words to them in an interview much later. But she also mentioned they were just going for garrison duty right after this. The filmmakers omit that part. And we know this because there was an investigation into all of this done at the CBC and by the Senate of Canada. So we know all of these things, what was used and what wasn't used in all of this. So it's one of those things where they're using emotion to set up a circumstance that they're trying to push an agenda of anti-leadership, anti-British, all of that stuff. And the Kay Christie example is perfect. Also, it just doesn't make any sense. Why is she crying about them loading bullets into a rifle if she just thinks they're going for garrison duty and nothing's going to happen? Makes no filmmaking sense either. It's just nonsensical. Just like so much of this.
Just an island, but a chunk of mainland, including the city of Kowloon.
Yeah.
The mainland territory stretched 40 kilometers to the Chinese border,
Mhm.
where the Japanese army sat.
Yep.
Between the Japanese and most of the Hong Kong people was the main defense, stretching from Gin Drinkers Bay 11 miles through the
And
mountains.
here's just some strange assertions.
A white ribbon of concrete. The Gin Drinkers line is still etched into the mountains, overlooking a crucial freshwater reservoir.
Wrong. It is not a white ribbon of concrete. That is dust from a hiking trail. I only highlight this one because it just shows the line into all of this. The Gin Drinkers line was never meant to look like some sort of trench line or something. It was about bunkers and trenches and emplacements, most of them which were disguised as homes and buildings, and meant to slow down in advance. It's not some sort of World War I trench here that you can easily see from the air. This is just one of the examples of them just doing no research whatsoever. It's just nonsense. At the time when this is made in the early 1990s, this information was readily available. All they need to do is literally talk to somebody who lived there, which it seems like they didn't do, which is unfortunate. I don't even think they really went. The 2 filmmakers themselves, the McKenna brothers. Somebody obviously went because they had a veteran. They took veterans, but I don't think the 2 of them ever went, and I never even talked to anybody who lived there. It's just another example. So I'm not going to point out everything that's wrong moving forward. That's just an example of something so simple that they just didn't even bother to do. And here's the 2 veterans I just mentioned.
Canadians didn't know of London's earlier calculation that these defenses would not survive long if the Japanese attacked.
Okay, there's another problem right there. Nobody knew. There was all kinds of estimates. The line was never finished, like I said in an earlier video about Hong Kong, which I'll link down below, so you can check that one out too. It's about another video someone else made, just online. Not like a full-out documentary or anything like this. Well, documentary's a bit too nice about this because it's poorly done. It's barely a documentary. It's more of a drama than a documentary. Not just me saying that. But anyway, yeah, you can find out lots about the Gin Drinkers line and the problems there in another video. I'm just going to keep moving forward. So we're getting into the battle here in more detail. I'm going to skip over the mainland fighting because there's not much involving the Canadians. First Canadian casualty was taken there. But there's some things about the fighting on the island from that map you saw earlier that are just made up. Again, made up. Cool aerial footage of Hong Kong though, from the time. And they do interview Japanese veterans of the battle as well, which is interesting. And they do have them meet the Canadians and the Japanese veterans at the end of the video.
Hong Kong is a very strong castle that would take 100 years to destroy.
There was certain rumors of that, and that's something, of course, the British encouraged at the time.
So as he prepared for the battle, he prepared for his death.
One Japanese did die in the fighting. Quite a lot.
The British commanders had always expected an attack from the sea.
True.
So had placed most of their fortifications at the bottom of the island.
Sort of. I mean, there's not that many fortifications on the island to begin with. Most of the fortifications were put into the Gin Drinkers line because they expected an attack through mainland China, not necessarily from landings. to the south of the island. Of course, it's an island just off the South China Sea. There's expectations of an amphibious landing, and that had gone on ever since the British had been in Hong Kong, since the late 1830s was a concern of naval attack. It's nothing new. This is just kind of misrepresenting it, but it's not the worst by any means in the episode.
They still expected a Japanese attack from the sea, even though the enemy was now in control of the mainland on the other side.
Not true.
All the Japanese had to do was cross the harbor.
And that had been changed. The defensive plan had changed by this point. But they did cross here at the Lyman Passage. Because it is the narrowest point. It's the easiest point to attack. They just fail at first, the Japanese,
British
actually.
commanders said the Japanese would never come across the water at night.
They did say that. There was rumors of this. Yeah.
Were racially prone to
Happened, yes. They told the Canadians this. I heard from a veteran myself.
Their night vision was supposed to be poor.
Yeah.
Both sides reduced the enemy to a racial caricature.
True.
Westerners think themselves very superior.
And this is another example of these use of actors. These are ones I can't confirm either, where they come from, who they are, anything at all. Because again, I don't read Japanese, and there's such few Japanese sources on the fighting in Hong Kong, period, to dig into, to even try and get translated and understood. So it's unfortunate because it's a side of the battle that needs to be better understood, I think, and hasn't happened.
But are really very effeminate and very cowardly.
This was told by numerous
Intense dislike of fighting in the rain.
Japanese troops and all of this stuff. And this is covered very well in John Dower's book, War Without Mercy, which I'll link below. You can check out and buy a copy. It helps you with commission, actually, if you do buy one. So here's the landing.
John Stroud was in his trench waiting.
It was dark.
Part coming up, literally bad in terms of making things up, conflating and misunderstanding events, trying to push a certain narrative. It's all on display in this short little vignette, again, coming with another actor who is representing Sergeant John Payne.
John Payne phoned British headquarters to report that the Japanese had come ashore.
I got a British staff officer and told him the Japanese had landed. I said we needed artillery support, and quickly. He tells me there's no possibility the Japanese are on the island. We're commanded by these British imperial types. Some of them just don't trust us colonials. He actually told me that I must be dreaming.
So this event actually did occur, but John Payne was not involved in it in the slightest. Nowhere near these events, actually. He was on the other side of the island with the rest of the Grenadiers, who were in the West Brigade. Again, I've talked about this many times. I'll link the Hong Kong playlist below. And you can check out that and understand the battle a little bit better. Because again, it's a confusing one. So it's the Royal Rifles are actually on the other side of the island. And it's a Royal Rifles soldier. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But something that does happen like that they don't believe the Japanese had landed yet. And that they wanted to bring the artillery down, which was in short supply. But there's no follow-up line about these British colonial, they don't trust us colonial types. None of that happens. Payne never says anything like that, even in a different context. And why I know that for sure is because Payne is executed later on as a POW for trying to escape. Those words are not documented by Payne in any way, shape, or form. And how could they be? Payne was dead. He could not have talked to the producers. He was nowhere near these events. So again, that's just showing they're making things up for dramatic storytelling purposes and to push their anti-British, anti-leadership agenda. So we're getting into the surrender of the island here.
Grenadiers and others rounded up as prisoners were now in danger. Some Japanese soldiers wanted revenge.
The Japanese came in, moved us out of the compound. They told us that the war was over as far as we were concerned. We asked about the wounded and could we take them with us? And they said, no, definitely not. Leave it here. We'll take good care of them. So they did real good care of them. They went in and put bayonets in them, shot them, and then they burnt the whole works that were left.
So that happened many times before the surrender, after wounded or killed outright, and so many documented by the war crimes trials that took place afterwards. It happened a lot, unfortunately. The Japanese just went on this bloody rampage during the battle, after killing POWs outright. And then the torture basically inflicted on them as PMWs, which forms the rest of the episode mostly. Talking about those experiences, and we'll look at a little bit of that, but I don't want to look at that too much, just because it's actually not poorly done.
There are few films or photographs of life inside the Sham Shui Po prison camp.
Oh, yeah, true.
These drawings
On the
by
mainland.
Hong Kong veterans provide a visual record.
Yep, William Allister is one of them, famous
The
artist.
prisoners were warehoused in a steaming, crowded barracks.
Disease was rampant. Very cool.
One of the
No
artists
sanitation.
was John Payne.
Okay, so here's John Payne again. This is kind of like, they use him, like I showed you in the battle parts. And this is kind of the arc that I talked about. And the part coming up is very well documented. So that is one part of this that is done correctly.
There's a lot of talk in the camp. They were going to be liberated before too long by the Brits or the Americans.
There was always rumors of the war ending
I wouldn't bet on it.
all the time.
I've given this place 100 days. I won't be alone going over the wire.
And here comes the conclusion of Payne's story.
The prisoners heard in August 1942 that many of them would be sent to Japan.
Many were.
4 of them decided that now was the time to try and escape.
Yes, they did.
John Payne was the leader.
Hmm.
On the day of the attempt, he wrote this letter to his mother in Winnipeg.
Dear Mother, I have decided to take a chance on getting out. There are numerous reasons for this step, the chief being that the cholera and the fly season is starting. And anyway, I'm already sick of Japanese hospitality.
John Payne made this drawing to help plan the escape. On a dark night, a ladder was placed to get them over the wire. They got into a nearby sampan and made a break across the water.
You share my views on fatalism, so I know you won't condemn my judgment. Just in case I shouldn't make it, you must remember that according to our beliefs, I have departed for a much nicer place, I hope. Although it will grieve me to exchange a guitar for a heart. But enough of this drivel. I'll be able to destroy this note myself, I'm sure. So, bye-bye for now. Your devoted son, John.
So those 4 are captured and executed, unfortunately, and sadly, and horribly. Payne's letter survives. It's in the Canadian War Museum collection and on display in the Hong Kong section today. And you can go see it yourself. So that's how we know that this happened.
In the years after the war, as they struggled with the physical and psychological aftermath of their imprisonment, the Canadian government made them plead for each small increase.
So here's the ending and talking about the treatment of the veterans, which I do believe, and I agree with another one, I guess I should say more than just one. The treatment of the veterans was horrible by the Canadian government. They were not treated well. Yes, we have the Veterans Charter in the country at the time, but it still was not enough for what these men went through. The Valour and the horror producers presented as, this betrayal, which is not the case. Veterans didn't believe that they were being sent to die for no reason. They signed up as soldiers. They signed up for a job. They knew what the job entailed, and they didn't want to be seen as victims. But that's what happens. And Valour and the horror played into this until the 1990s, when had already passed away due to health problems. But when the remaining few were able to really make an impact on how the veterans were treated.
Increase in medical benefits and war pensions.
They did. It was very difficult for them to increase their pensions. Very difficult.
Canadian prison camp survivors made a claim for reparations from Japan.
They did.
But in 1952, without their permission, the Canadian government legally absolved Japan of any responsibility.
As part of the peace negotiations, the peace treaty that was eventually signed later. And that was where the reparation came from. And I'm not going to show the end because it just continues to do the same thing using veterans accounts and the veterans themselves as kind of political pieces in their kind of fight. So that's the best I can do. The video is too long to do really much detail. It's on an hour and 40 minutes. I'll link it below if you want to watch it. I don't suggest you do. It's awful. Don't watch it, but you can if you want to subject yourself to it. If you haven't already seen it, it's purely terrible. except for those kind of, what, 2-3 things I noted that are pretty good. The pain thing, the lack of intelligent analysis by Canada itself, and the treatment of the veterans. The rest is just utter garbage, made up nonsense. Don't believe what's going on here. And people have told me, why do you care about this documentary? That's a good point. The point I'll end on. At the time was huge. It was supposed to be millions of Canadians live on television when it was broadcast. That doesn't happen here back then. Now, for anything other than even hockey doesn't get those kinds of numbers. The millions watched this. It was taught in schools. It still influences how we view Hong Kong. I hear it when I talk to people. They ask me especially when I was doing the dissertation, they ask me what I'm doing, and they say Hong Kong, and then I say Hong Kong, and they go, ooh, that was a rough one. I go, yeah. And it's always about how the British wanted to slaughter Canadians and all of this, and then more of that, and all about how the fighting developed and everything. That kind of colonial thought that, these are just, cannon fodder colonials is brought up all the time. And it comes from the Valour and the Horror, because it certainly doesn't come from other things, because videos have, as we all know, especially today with the internet. So this is why I still care, because there's no rebuttals here. There's academic rebuttals, and again, they're excellently done. One of my supervisors wrote an excellent one. No one's reading them. No one cares about that stuff, right? These things, videos, have bigger impact seen by more people. So that's why I did this. So there's something out there saying that the Valour and the Horror is terrible, should not be used in any way in shape or form to understand Canada's war. The other 2 episodes about Canadians in Normandy and Canadians in Bomber Command are equally awful. All 3 of them are terrible. The Hong Kong one is said to be the least terrible. It's just as bad. That's because there are no experts on Hong Kong, like myself and my supervisor, Galen Para. He knows his stuff. I do too. We're one of the few who have said that this thing is garbage through and through. And we know what we're talking about. So again, thanks for watching. I can't say I enjoyed this, but it's good to get this out on video. I think that's important, rebuttaling this way to show that this is just not a good historical piece. Calling it history is an injustice to that word. So if you like this stuff, I'm going to be doing maybe more depending on how these first couple videos go with the reactions. I enjoy doing them. Except for this one. I'll get to some better stuff in the future and kind of highlight some better history. But again, like I said, I felt this was important to do, so I did it. Again, thanks for watching and hearing my insights. And if you want to support the channel, please do subscribe and like the video. And leave your comments below, particularly if there's another video that you want me to look at, something you've come across that you think it might be interesting for me to take a look at, or your thoughts on the Valour and the Horror. Lots of stories behind this thing, but particularly related to veterans who watched it and were just outright appalled, as they should have been. Lots of stories, and I love hearing them and hearing about what the veterans thought of how they were portrayed. So if you have any of those to share, please do as well. So I'll see you next time. Thanks everyone for watching.